Let's go on then to the cabinet reshuffle at Westminster. The Prime Minister has reshaped his top team after the resignation of Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner over a stamp duty blunder controversy, insert appropriate word here. David Lammy is now the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. Yvette Cooper moves from Home Secretary to Foreign Secretary. Shabana Mahmood becomes the Home Secretary. So this is the first time that 3 of the 4 great offices of state are held by women. Ian Murray was sacked as Secretary of State for Scotland and has been replaced by Douglas Alexander. Mr Murray left government only to be brought back as a Minister of State at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. There are also, I think, 6 ministers who are Scottish Labour MPs kind of scattered throughout this reshuffle as well. Ayesha, I want to come to you actually first on this. Starmer, it's reported, was planning a reshuffle at some point fairly soon, but not as soon as this. He was definitely kind of forced into it. What does that say about his leadership? Has he emerged from this in a position of strength or in a sort of slightly deteriorated position?
Well, I think there's 2 ways of looking at that. So, I mean, there's no way of spinning this as being some great week for Labour, and it's like a great jazz hands moment for the leadership. It's been a terrible week for Labour, and Angela Rayner did wrong, but it's also a great loss to the party because, you know, in a sea of quite beige politicians, and I say this about, you know, all politics, but that absolutely applies to the Labour Party. She was quite rare in that she sort of naturally kind of shone. She had this kind of technicolor quality about her, and she had that sort of, whether you loved her or hated her, she was a really colourful character in the sort of like, you know, tableau of quite dull politics that we've got at the moment. So I think people were very, very sad to see her go. Now, absolutely, this was meant to be, you know, the week started on the Monday with a reset at Downing Street, bringing back some big Blairite figures, particularly somebody called Tim Allen, and this kind of finally kind of number 10 having a proper economic advisor. So I think the plan was, you know, hopefully just to kind of let things sort of bed down. And my understanding is that Tim Allen did start on that Monday when it was announced that he was coming in. And Keir Starmer talked about his frustration, and he understood, he shared the frustration of the public that things were not moving fast enough, and he got the anger about change. So this was phase 2 beginning on Monday. I don't think anyone at Downing Street thought that, you know, phase 2 kind of meant a massive reshuffle come Friday over the weekend. But I suppose the way they've looked at it is when life gives you lemons, make sure you do a blue Labour reshuffle. And that's sort of what's happened. I mean, I would very much describe this reshuffle. I think what has gone on is that I think this is the reshuffle they probably wanted to do a bit further down the track, maybe after the next set of local elections. I think they wanted to do a smaller, more junior level reshuffle and save a big reshuffle for after what will undoubtedly be quite difficult elections in May, Scotland, Wales, and local elections in England, particularly around London. This, you know, Angela Rayner going has obviously expedited that. I mean, I think the things that are interesting about this reshuffle is that there is a direction of travel set. It's quite a controversial direction of travel in terms of the party, but there is a direction of travel. It's a very blue Labour direction of travel. The 2 key appointments for me was Shabana Mahmood. Now, Shabana Mahmood is being lionised within the party and the media at the moment. You know, there's a lot. This woman has to do a lot of work. She's been tasked with saving the party. She's going to, you know, basically stop the small boats. She's going to, you know, be really, really tough on immigration. And my understanding is that the reshuffle happened largely to accommodate Shabana Mahmood being moved into the Home Office. So everything revolved around that one key appointment. And the other, so that tells you immigration is going to be a big part of the policy agenda going forward. And that could mean some quite difficult conversations on particularly the ECHR and the Refugee Convention. Although my strong feeling is that is, Keir Starmer does not want to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Maybe it's some kind of discussion about tweaking, maybe it's some kind of coalition of the willing amongst some kind of, leaders in Europe facing similar issues.
Okay.
The second appointment is Pat McFadden going to a beefed up welfare department. We all know that the government got into a lot of hot water over its botched welfare plans in terms of reforming. That gives you a big steer that welfare reform will be back on the agenda. And Pat McFadden obviously is a very tough operator. He knows government very well. That job he had as in the Cabinet Office means he's one of the few people that kind of has a 360 view across all the departments. He kind of knows where the bodies are buried. Actually, alongside Darren Jones, who's kind of become this new kind of enforcer for the Prime Minister. So that's my big takeaway from this reshuffle. I think you're seeing a very strong blue Labour. In fact, I interviewed Maurice Glassman on the day of the reshuffle, and the two people he talked up the most was Shabana Mahmood, and the second was Steve Reid. And of course, Steve Reid has now moved and has taken over Angela Rayner's old housing brief. So, a lot of disquiet amongst the ranks, but I think there is a direction of travel, and you're going to be looking at, a difficult budget, cost of living, economy, immigration and welfare.
Nice.
So I agree. I think Pat McFadden is actually the single most important appointment in this reshuffle, because without welfare reform, there's no point. I mean, if you just look at the raw numbers of what this country spends, we're spending such a massive proportion now of government expenditure on welfare and the NHS. Well over half of government expenditure just between welfare and the NHS, which means the other half is for absolutely everything else. And it can't go on. It's completely impossible. If you look at the projected numbers for welfare, particularly in work benefits, it is completely impossible to operate the country and operate the economy without massive changes to welfare, which obviously they flunked last year. So I was quite positive about Pat McFadden going in there because of the reputation that he's got, and it made me think, okay, they are going to have another go at this because they know they really have no choice. And also, by the way, let's not believe some of the deputy leadership contenders that have been on the radio over the last few days. Welfare reform is very popular in this country. It isn't unpopular. That's nonsense. It's popular to reform welfare. I'll tell you one thing, though, that made me think, actually, I'm not sure this is going to get anywhere, is that Labour have instantly allowed this narrative to take hold that the new deputy leader must be an opponent of Starmer, basically. Right? Yeah. It's got to be a working class northern woman who will basically keep Starmer in check and be the antidote to Starmer. And you're going, this is crazy. Who would run their operation this way, where you say, right, we're going to have this big reshuffle and we're going to choose a number two who doesn't like the boss? That's a recipe for stability. That sounds like a great idea.
But it's also slightly odd because it's the deputy leader of the party, which, when you're in government, surely takes on a slightly less important role, theoretically.
Well, I mean, unless it's Bridget Phillipson, it's obviously not going to be a government minister now who does it. But I just think they've allowed this narrative to take hold that they have to create, they have to elect a deputy leader who's basically going to oppose the government at all turns. I just think that's a recipe for total disaster. So the next time Pat McFadden comes, on with his welfare cuts, who does the media get to respond to Pat McFadden? Not Kemi Badenoch. They'll get the deputy leader of the Labour Party to come on and be the opposition to Pat McFadden on welfare cuts. It is crazy. Completely crazy. They shouldn't be doing it.
Does it speak of division, Ayesha? Is that what that's about? That actually, if they need a deputy leader who is representative of this kind of soft left or the left of the Labour Party, that is a divided party that Starmer's in charge of?
Labour? Divisions? I mean, this is all a very new concept to me, having been around the Labour Party for about 20 years. I know nothing of what you say of this division amongst political parties. So, look, in terms of the deputy leadership contest, I think, Andy, where I'd sort of push back is I don't think that is a narrative that Number 10 particularly want. In fact, behind the scenes, they're making it pretty clear that they would like to be in a position where Bridget gets 80 nominations and there's no contest and she can, become the deputy leader for all the reasons that you suggest. So I think it is unfair to say that somehow the leadership is like, yeah, let's have a massive old stushy in the party right now and let's elect somebody who I might have just recently sacked and might be a bit kind of pissed off with me. I don't think, to be fair, that is a narrative that's coming from the leadership. I mean, the role of the deputy is going to be really interesting now. I worked for Harriet Harman for many, many years when, she was a long-serving deputy leader to Gordon Brown and then Ed Miliband. And it's an interesting role because you are elected, so that does give you a kind of a special status, and you are elected by the members, so you do inherently feel that it is your job to sort of be in touch with the members and be that sort of voice for them. But also you are acutely aware that you don't want to be looking disloyal in the media, Andy, for the reasons that you just cite. And I remember, you're often also the person put out on the Today programme or the Morning Round or Good Morning Scotland when things are tricky for the government. So there's no way that Number 10 wants somebody who's going to be, difficult and has an axe to grind and is perhaps, pitch rolling themselves for a shot at the title at some point down the future. I mean, I think where we are is that I think if there isn't a contest, you're going to have a PLP which is already quite grumpy, being even more grumpy that they haven't had the chance to sort of, have some kind of contest, have some airing of ideas. But this deputy leader is going to be very different from deputy leaders gone by because, she, and it will be a she in this case, is going to come to power in, quite a kind of strained set of conditions. But they will have to be, whoever wins it. If it's Bridget, then I think, she will absolutely toe the line because she's a cabinet minister and is bound by collective responsibility. If it is somebody like Lucy Powell or Emily Thornberry, and I do take the point about, I think it looks difficult to have everybody coming from London as the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the leader of the party. But if Emily is popular amongst the members, but if it is somebody like Lucy or Emily or somebody who has been more critical of Keir Starmer and perhaps does have an axe to grind, then undoubtedly that's going to make things much more tricky for Number 10 to handle politically.
Yeah, Ayesha, fantastic insight, particularly on the the work and pensions and immigration focus. I think that's really interesting. Take it as read. Can I make one point and ask you a particular question, if I may? Firstly, just going back to what catalysed all this stuff was Angela Rayner standing down, and I agree that she should have stood down. But how refreshing is it that she did so in such a relatively short order, given the context of what we went through with the Tory shenanigans, which we won't go into today, but also you could argue, some of the situations we had with the SNP and Michael Matheson, all this stuff was drawn out for so long. And I kind of felt that there's something refreshing about that. And I agree with you, actually. She's one of these figures that's different, isn't she? And the way she approaches things. And actually, I think that can be a very big asset to your party. So I do wonder if she has a future in the long term in the senior echelons of the party, but maybe Ayesha knows more about that. But I want to ask about Ed Miliband, because I found this particularly fascinating. So London media were quick to report, Robert Peston amongst others, that Keir Starmer had said to Ed, want you out of energy, will you take the housing brief? He declined, stuck his heels in, and for whatever reason, in the wisdom of the Labour Party, whether it was Number 10 or whether it was Ed's team, somebody briefed this, thinking it would be beneficial to one of them. Well, it's not, because if you can imagine being Ed Miliband in a room right now with an offshore wind developer, oil and gas operator, whoever, supply chain company, in the back of their minds, they're going, your boss doesn't want you. For Keir Starmer's point of view, he looks weak because they couldn't fire him, because when he dug his heels on some sting and energy, he couldn't fire him. So, two questions for you, Ayesha. Are we going to see a change in policy on energy? Is that why Ed was asked to shift? Because it ain't working? Clearly, if it was working, they wouldn't have asked them to move. And secondly, how much does this weaken Keir Starmer, the fact that this has been publicised, and that he can't even fire a guy that says, I'm not moving?
Right, so lots to go there. Let me just start with Angela Rayner. I mean, I think Angela Rayner is going to continue to be a big voice, not just in the Labour movement, but in the general sort of political world. I can actually see her becoming a bit of a kind of breakout voice. I think she will be able to enter the world of podcasting. I think she'll be able to be doing lots of broadcasts. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a kind of Angela Rayner one-woman show, kind of maybe an audience with Angela Rayner, perhaps even at the Fringe coming to you soon. She's such a colourful character. She's naturally really funny. She's interesting. She's great company. I always kind of think she's sort of the love child of Barbara Castle and Rizzo from Greece. Like, she's got that kind of like... she's great fun. Like, she's terrific. So I can see her having, quite a big presence. I reckon there'll be agents all around the country trying to snap her up right now, and she can do a lot of that stuff from the backbenches. So I don't think we're going to see the last of Angela. I think, however, in terms of her return to a big job in government, because tax in the economy is going to be such a difficult issue going ahead. We're all kind of awaiting this very difficult budget. So I think just when people are potentially going to have to pay more tax, it's quite difficult to bring somebody back who had to go, on issues around tax. But I still think she's got a very, very big voice. I think she's going to be a big media voice, actually. She might come and take quite a lot of my gigs, actually, so maybe I shouldn't big her up too much and be considerably better at them than me.
You just sold yourself down the river there.
I know, I always do this. In fact, it'll be my agent giving her a ring right now. She'll be like, oh yeah, we need...
I heard there was a vacancy coming up on Times Radio Breakfast Sunday, but it's just a
long overdue.
Apparently, somebody tried to get rid of somebody, but he refused to go. So,
Wait a minute. I want Ayesha's answer on Ed, by the way. So
right,
sharp, you two.
On Ed, right. So I looked at that briefing, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't quite kind of floor me the same way it did you, only because there has been so much briefing about how everyone hates Ed and everyone sort of, wants to get him out. I mean, this briefing has been going on for a very, very, very long time.
And where's it coming from, Ayesha? Where's it coming from? Is it from number 10? I mean, where's it emanating from?
So there is a group in the Labour Party, particularly on the kind of, more right of the party that are angry with Ed Miliband for his time as leader, going back to that period. They didn't like the direction in which they perceived he was taking the party. Although, remember, there were people at the time saying, oh, actually, this guy's like a honking right-winger because he's now talking about, immigration and things like that. If you remember, ahead of the spending review, there was a lot of very vicious briefing about Ed, and actually his department ended up being one of the winners out of the spending review. They did actually very, very well. So I don't think that Ed, I don't know if it is true that he was asked to move, but I do think he is a kind of a quietly powerful figure in the party, in the sense that the green energy agenda is really, really important to this Labour project. Now, there might be some who think that, are we going too far on net zero? I mean, people like Gary Smith and the GMB are very vocal about the fact that they think that there should be more drilling in the North Sea and on the oil and gas stuff. But having said all that, this bit of the agenda is very important to the overall kind of economic picture about a modern economy and, their growth strategy, and how they do firmly believe that green jobs are going to be a very important part of this country's economic future, and it's the right thing to do. So I think Ed is quite useful for being number 10 because he absorbs a lot of grief in terms of the party. I think he is useful to say, look, he's doing an important job for the party. He's very popular amongst the members as well.
Sorry to interrupt, but why then ask him to go?
Well, we don't know if he was asked to go. I don't know that. I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
Number 10 didn't deny it when approached.
Well, don't forget.
You would deny it if you weren't.
But not that long ago, there was briefing saying that Bridget Phillipson was going to go. And now, not only did she stay, but number 10's basically asking her to be deputy leader. So, Geoff, these things, move around very quickly. People fall in and out of favour very quickly. But I think the key thing is that, Ed Miliband is still in post. Every time, there's lots of briefings saying that he's about to go, and then he ends up staying. I think that the other thing that's interesting, he was actually at the TUC dinner a couple of nights ago. He was doing the big after dinner speech, which is reserved for a kind of a senior member of the government. He's even though he and Gary Smith have got sort of different views on oil and gas drilling, they get on pretty well. I think he's seen as an important part of making sure that this government is not too blue Labour. And it has got some kind of balance, because again, it's useful if people are getting interviewed saying you're just taking the party in one direction and it's all just chasing reform. They can say, well, that's actually not true. Look at what Ed Miliband is doing in his. So I don't think it's the relationship is always easy between Ed Miliband and some of that wing of the party, but he's still there, and he's still got a chunky brief which has got a lot of money from Rachel Reeves.
Yeah. I think we've got to just conclude our reshuffle chat by considering the Scotland office and trying to work out what on earth happened there. The departure of Ian Murray as Secretary of State for Scotland, well, it felt in the immediate aftermath went down like the proverbial cup of cold sick. And then he was kind of brought back into government at a ministerial level the next day or a couple of days later. Andy, can I come to Andy actually first on this? Andy, Ian Murray leaving as Secretary of State for Scotland, is it clear to you that he had done something wrong or that he wasn't performing in that role? Why did he have to go?
That wasn't clear to me at all, no. And I think, actually, Scottish Labour were really shocked by that, actually. I think there was genuine shock that had happened. Yeah. And there was a bit of annoyance as well. Kat Headley, who we know well on this podcast, been on several times. I saw a tweet from Kat. She looked really angry about it. And a lot of the anger came from the fact that, remember, Ian Murray was the sole survivor here for a long time. 2 full terms of Parliament? Maybe 3 terms of Parliament, actually. I can't quite remember. Scottish Labour MP in a sea of yellow down there. So, I think there was real anger at how he was treated. My initial presumption, to be honest, was that Starmer wanted to make it clear that he was just making a lot of changes and that this was a proper reset, and maybe that Ian was just a victim of that, having not really done anything particularly wrong. There was a bit of briefing, which I thought was a little bit classless, to be honest. There was a little bit of briefing about, he just wasn't good enough. He just wasn't performing all that well, which, I'm not convinced of. And if you're going to point the finger at him for that, there's a lot of other people around the table you could point the finger at for that as well. And also, if you don't think he's that good, why have you just given him 2 separate ministries 2 days after you got rid of him? So I thought it was clumsy for sure, and pretty unfair, to be honest.
Ayesha, what's your perception of what's happened there?
Well, I think that was, Geoff talked about, the Ed Miliband thing was the sort of big kind of moment. I think for a lot of people, particularly people with a Scottish Labour connection, the removal of Ian was really shocking. People were shocked. The WhatsApp groups were popping off. Everybody was like, oh my goodness, I don't understand this. There was just genuine shock. There's genuine shock. And people felt incredibly bad for Ian because he is really popular amongst the party. I think he's actually held in a lot of affection and esteem across party in Scotland. I even had, SNP people and Scottish Tories get in contact saying, actually, I've got a lot of time for Ian because he is somebody who really was that last man standing after the utter wipeout in 2015. I will always remember being in Labour HQ just watching, and the kind of jaws on the floor as people lost their seat, one by one throughout the night, and he was the only person surviving. And that was a really tough time for him, being the only member of the Scottish PLP. Secret Santa was a nightmare, honestly. Like, it really was really, it was tough for Ian. It was very difficult.
At least he got what he wanted.
But, and so I think people did think he did a good job. And, if you look at some of the big policy things, this Norway deal, the supercomputer, it wasn't like Scotland was kind of, underperforming in terms of this by-election in Hamilton, which Labour won. But politics is a tough game. Your future is in the hands of somebody else. They think highly enough of him. What was interesting is, you're right, it was announced he was sacked. There was a massive pushback from people publicly and privately, and I think the party was not, lots of party members and others were not happy about it. And then he was offered these two very, these two roles, which I think is actually very suited for culture. Edinburgh Festival is like the largest cultural festival on the planet. AI and tech is going to be very important to this government as well. So I think the fact that he was brought back is a signal of how highly he is held. Douglas Alexander coming back is something that I think the leadership in Scotland are very pleased about, because he is a very seasoned, very experienced political operator. He served every leader since John Smith. He's got a huge amount of grit under his fingernails. I think Douglas is going to be doing a lot of media heavy lifting for Keir Starmer. I've really noticed over the last year, when things have been particularly difficult, particularly on, Andy mentioned the welfare stuff earlier, it's Douglas who they have often turned to go out on the airways to try and kind of calm things down. He is very experienced on the media. Yeah. He knows where the guardrails are. I always remember on that welfare stuff, I was actually doing a lot of analysis for Good Morning Britain, and we watch the government minister of the day and then we do analysis. Normally they're kind of wriggling around and having a really, really like nightmarish time. He had a very robust interview, but what was interesting is he totally took the temperature down, because the briefing the night before had been all these people in the PLP pushing back against the welfare reform are absolute idiots and we hate them and they're completely awful people. And his tone completely changed that in the morning. He said, look, I disagree with them, but I think they come at this from very, very good faith. These are people of good conscience. I respect a lot of these rebels. His tone was very good. He just managed to take down the temperature, and it was felt that, he did really, really calm things down with the PLP. So I can see him being used a lot, because there's lots of choppy waters coming up ahead for this government.
It was him they put out on Friday when all the questions were going to be about Angela Rayner. It was him that came on Times Radio, among others, to sort of try and pacify and calm that situation. Go on, Geoff.
Just one final question for you. Thank you. You've been so generous with your time. Kind of nice segue in. I just want to say, totally agree on Ian Murray, and a lot of people don't recognise that the work goes on behind the scenes. He's been very responsive on some really key issues, particularly, just to go back to energy, but around some offshore wind issues that we've had in Scotland. Been very responsive, very quick to act, and I think he will be a loss. That said, Douglas Alexander, I've known him for a long time, goes back to my first days in Westminster. He is a capable person. I don't care what anyone says, frankly. He is capable. So it's a good replacement. I just felt that I didn't think Ian Murray was deserving of the demotion. One question for you, Ayesha, if I may. So the personnel has changed. Okay, you can argue the toss about how successful that has been. Perhaps our discussion on this podcast suggests that it's still not been without its difficulty. But what significant policy changes there going to be, right? And my final bit of this is Starmer has got, in my opinion, 8 months. I actually think it's that important, because Reform are winning so much by such a lead just now, a consistent lead in all the polls, that if he doesn't turn this around by the time we get to next May's elections, local elections in England, Scottish and Welsh parliamentary elections, and that's a difficult result, do you agree with the assessment that his job is on the line at that point, if that transpires?
Well, look, I mean, it's interesting hearing you also kind of agree that Douglas is a very, very, he's a very kind of experienced and he's a top level politician. I just want to say quickly before I move on to the other point, just a few other Scottish appointments which I think are really important, and there's some great talent within the Scottish PLP. I think Zubair Ahmed becoming a health minister is brilliant. I mean, Zubair's a really clever guy. He's also one of Scotland's top surgeons, incredibly well respected. So I think that's a great move. I think, Martin McCluskey going into energy, Geoff, you were talking about energy policy there. I think Martin McCluskey, along with Michael Shanks, working alongside Ed Miliband doing energy is adding to the kind of voltage of that department. So I think they're just, important things to sort of mention, as well as Douglas Alexander. And of course, you've got Kirsty McNeil there as well. Look, I largely agree with the point you make, Geoff, about how serious things are for the Labour Party at the moment. The Labour Party, having come in with this big majority to be just over a year in, hovering around 20% at the polls, that is not good. And I don't think anybody will, and nor should any from Labour, try and spin a line saying that this is a great moment. But a direction has now been set with this reshuffle. I think the policy development that we're going to see, well, first of all, the budget is going to be the next big inflection point. And I think a lot of Keir Starmer's future and Rachel Reid, well, and the party's future and the government's future is going to be set in this budget. You know, who are going to be the winners and losers from this budget. So that is going to be absolutely germane to what happens. As I said earlier, I think that the big policy direction of travel we need to look out for is immigration and welfare. I think they're the two things that they definitely want to focus on. The other thing I think attached to welfare is looking at special educational needs and the how you can try and, you know, manage the rising costs of that. That's more of a kind of an English issue. You know, I think come the next election, the main issues are going to be cost of living, NHS. I think crime is going to be better. Antisocial behaviour and crime is actually a really, really big issue, and immigration. So that's going to, and look, who's up and who's down in this reshuffle? That's interesting to us now. Nobody's going to care about that come the next election. It is going to be delivery and the perception of delivery, because the communications is another big part of all of this. You know, it doesn't feel like the comms have been that good. In terms of Keir Starmer's future, look, these elections coming up in May are going to be critical. Yes, the next election is a long time away and a lot can happen in that time. Can reform sustain this momentum that they've built? You know, can Keir Starmer turn around some of these issues? All of that is very important. But let's not kid ourselves, these elections will set an important direction of travel and narrative. If Labour does really badly at these elections, it is going to be really, really tough for Keir Starmer. I don't think it's over for Keir Starmer, though, only because I think the Labour Party, in its DNA and in how its rules are written and have been tweaked, I think they'd be very, very uncomfortable. I think there'll be a lot of noises off at that point, but whether anybody actually goes ahead and mounts a leadership challenge, I'm not so sure. It's quite difficult to do that now because the rules have changed. And the Labour Party is historically really squeamish about even getting rid of its leader when it's doing badly in opposition, let alone one of the few rare precious times that the Labour, you know, there's only ever been 7 men that have made it across that threshold to be Prime Minister who have been Labour leaders. So, but look, let's see where things are. It's not going to be an easy few months. You know, Keir Starmer addressed MPs on Monday night and he said, look, it is going to be a bumpy time ahead, and they very much see reform as their main challenger. They feel that the Tories are kind of down and out. So I think reform and the SNP, particularly in Scotland, are the main people that they're focusing on. But look, the other final thing I would say is, just to add a bit of balance, and I suppose you'd say, well, you would say this, you're a Labour peer, I am, but I just want to have a tiny bit of balance. I mean, sometimes the narrative is, and I'm not sweetening the pill here, it has been a difficult first year for Labour, the winter fuel allowance and all of these other things. But it has not all been, there have been some good developments. I think, you know, Scotland, of course, the SNP run the NHS. In England, you're beginning to see things shift on the NHS after a long time. I think the long-term investment in infrastructure and planning is really important. I think these deals you're seeing on I think defence has been really interesting, and you're starting to see some results. Of course, we just talked about that Norway deal in Scotland. You're seeing a lot of revitalisation in things like advanced manufacturing because of defence and the fact that we're talking about finally building new nuclear power stations. So it's not like no good things have happened under this Labour government. They have. The problem is this Labour government's not very good at communicating those things to the public. And the other thing is we are all slightly enraptured with reform at the moment. They're getting so much coverage. But the coverage is going to move from being fawning to being a bit more forensic. And I think that is an important thing just to bear in mind. I just interviewed the leader of Kent County Council, who's a reform leader, on my Times radio show, who's basically saying that, I think the COVID vaccines have caused cancer in the royal family. So, you know, there's a long way to go in this journey. And the public have still got a lot of big decisions to make about come the next general election.
Yeah. Baroness Hazarika, Ayesha, thank you so much. It's lovely to have you on the podcast. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much. I've had such a great time. Thanks.
Thank you. You can see Ayesha on basically every TV programme ever. Or you can listen to her on Times Radio Fridays at 1 o'clock and Saturdays and Sundays from 4 p.m.
But before Angela Rayner gets all my gigs.
That's right, yeah. Make the most of it. Ayesha, thank you so much.